Coming up, what an excellent day for Max Von Sydow. Sydow? 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 Father Merrin. And howdy, folks, and welcome back. This is minute 3 of The Exorcist Minute, a show where we are endeavoring to examine, extrapolate, and excavate The Exorcist minute by terrifying minute. My name is Lester Clark.
And I'm Keenan Diaz.
And we'll be your holy guides on this journey through what some have called the scariest movie of all time. And this is minute 3, and it starts with a man digging, and it ends with another man, a man in khakis, and he is walking, and the wind has picked up, and the wind is blowing a very specific direction that I noted in this viewing. And
I did not note that, so yeah. I'm interested to hear what you think of that.
Keenan, you said you had some stuff that you wanted to talk about in this.
Yeah,
minute.
I think. Well, in the minute, it's also very interesting, right? Because we continue to see a bunch of men who are excavating, seeming to work in unison. We don't get to really notice any of them, right? We don't get just close-ups. None of them have different clothes on, different costumes than anybody else. And then we interrupt that with a clearly young boy, like a younger person. So in many ways, he's the first person that we really notice is like this younger person.
And he's wearing He's wearing red, which is standing out amongst all the other folks who are wearing like just kind of like ordinary
nondescript, right? Yeah. Things to hide them in the background. So we know to pay attention to him. He's younger. Clearly, he's wearing different colored clothes, and he's coming from behind the camera and sort of breaking the horizontal landscape that we've set up. Yes. And he's running up against, away from us and up the hill. And so we start following him. And then, I sort of make fun in my work as a film instructor here at UNLV Film of people who sort of overemphasize like the auteurist film criticism, which is like, oh, this is like William Friedkin's other film, and this but I think it does read a little bit like the way that the French Connection works here. I
really?
Feel like I'm breaking my own rules. Yes, about this sort of chaos, but we're also very clear. So these sort of long takes as this boy is running through these tunnels, and there's chaos all around him, but we always know where we are and where to be looking and that sort of thing. So it did strike me this time as feeling a little French Connection-y. That's the film that William Friedkin had made right before this and won Best Director and Best Picture for.
Interesting. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. And so then, of course, he runs up and we get the first shot of a person's face, and he is a white man, and he is a movie star of sorts, and that's Max Von Sydow.
Max Von Sydow, or Max Von Sydow.
Oh, yes. My Swedish in-laws will be very upset that I can't pronounce it properly.
Max Von Sydow. I when I was little, I called him Max Von Sydow.
Oh, boy.
Exorcist fans are screaming at us. I can hear them.
And the Swedes in the audience.
And Ingmar Bergman fans are all just like railing at us right now.
Right. So, again, when we're looking backwards in a movie like this and we know the ending, and then we also are familiar with Max von Sydow up until his death only 2 years ago from when we're recording this. So he'd been in Star Wars films and a bunch of Best Picture nominees and had a couple Oscar nominations and a very familiar face. It's hard sometimes to think like, oh, this guy looks like he did in The Exorcist as he does in Shutter Island, for instance. What would that be? 40 years later. So
what you're saying is the viewers of the theatrical cut, seeing him in the theaters and knowing Max von I've doomed myself. We have doomed ourselves.
Uncle Maxie.
Uncle Maxie, the man in khakis. Max von Khakis. Sydow, like Greedo. Yes, this is all thanks to the Star Wars Minute. Everybody, go check out the Star Wars Minute. Okay.
Well, I'm a big trivia person, by the way, and I love game shows and that sort of thing. And in the game show community, we say never to make fun of someone for mispronouncing something because it means that they learned it by reading.
Ah, I like that.
My friend Jim Hoffman, who I'll make fun of here because he's not listening to this, but when we were in high school on the Trivia Bowl, he answered during a game, the question was like this Greek word that means the height of something or the most exemplary of something. And he rang in and said epitome. And we all sort of looked at him, and luckily we didn't laugh because I was like, what is that? What is he saying? But of course he was saying epitome.
Epitome. Yeah.
Epitome. So anyways, Max von Sydow, I'm not going to be able to unlearn my pronunciation of him that I've had in my head for almost 40 years now. So Max von Sydow. He would have been familiar to audiences because
Yes.
he was the star of a series of movies by Ingmar Bergman, the great
Mm,
Swedish filmmaker. I'm not sure how
right.
many Bergman films you've seen. Probably, it'd probably be right up your alley.
I have seen The Seventh Seal,
Hmm.
and I loved that. And that was a younger Max von Sydow. And it occurred to me, it's like, what an interesting kind of like thematic casting where he's talking to death in that one. And then there's another one where he plays the devil. And then in this one, he's going to be also doing this kind of like supernatural, like Christian mythos
Right.
type of stuff.
And of
So
course,
he's,
his first American role would have been as Jesus the Christ in King of Kings,
oh
which was
my
a
God.
giant epic 1965 film.
Well, there we go. See, this
Mhm.
guy has it all figured out.
He's playing it from both sides, I think.
Yes.
Right. Because in the Bergman films, he is oftentimes playing, as you say, devil characters.
Hmm.
More often than not, he's playing characters who are concerned with their faiths,
Mm-hmm.
who are losing their faith. So Ingmar Bergman
Interesting.
famously is somebody who his father was the chaplain to the King of Sweden,
Uh-huh.
so the Lutheran chaplain. So that's sort of the first thing that you learn about Bergman when you're studying him seriously is that not only was he someone who was losing his faith, as a lot of post-war Europeans were, right, considering what had happened in World War II,
Right.
and also, just the forward progression of humanism. But for Bergman to be doing that as the son of a family who was professionally a chaplain,
Hmm.
professionally clergy, that was a big deal. So oftentimes, Von Sydow is at the center of the films as someone who isn't sure that God even exists anymore, even when he's being presented with evidence that God does exist, as in The Seventh Seal, where he is not only interacting with death, but playing death in a game of chess.
Right.
Right. So he is
Oh,
He's coming back from the Crusades, or one of the Crusades rather.
right.
Hasn't
Right.
seen his family for a very long time. Is approached by the Grim Reaper on the beach and says,
Hmm.
"Well, I don't believe in any of this sort of hokum, but I'm going to play play you for a game of chess, and if I
Right.
win, then you get to leave me alone, and if you win, then you get my soul, of course."
Oh, that is so cool because we're going to see in this film that he is one of two priests who are a yin and yang to each other, in that we have one priest who is physically strong but weak in his faith,
Right.
and we have this guy who as of yet unnamed, the man in khakis, um, who is, and even here you can see the moment he gets up, he's on his knees and he's doing a little bit of digging, and the boy stops, and it's this nice shot where the boy's legs and his feet are kind of like framing the introduction to this new character,
Right.
and says, "Oh, we found something at the base. Come see." And the man in khakis gets to his feet, but you can tell that this is a man of years. This is a man who is physically weak compared to like these other like hale and hearty diggers. I like the fact that in his first moments, we are shown that he is kind of like a hero at the end of his journey. He's reaching kind of like the end of his life, and he is physically, at least physically, frail, and it takes him a little bit to get up. It takes him a little bit to walk, right? He has the white hair, he has the aged face, which is makeup, bringing it back to everybody is supposed to know Max von Sydow here. And so seeing him, what do you think their impressions would be? It's like, wait, I knew Max von Sydow was
Yeah,
here.
that guy looks familiar, right?
Hmm.
But he's old. So he's actually 44 years old in here, or
Hmm.
roughly around that, depending on when they shot this. And
Yeah.
it does remind me of the
God, I'm almost
blockbuster
44.
from what's
Jesus.
that?
I said I'm almost, oh
You're almost as
God.
old as this guy.
Yeah. Almost as old as this guy who has trouble getting up.
Yeah, it reminds me of from the previous year. So The Exorcist is 1973. And of course,
Mm.
in 1972, the big blockbuster of the year is The Godfather.
Uh-huh.
And similarly, we have a Marlon Brando who is 48 or 49, depending on when they're
Right.
shooting, looking much, much older. So
Yes.
this wouldn't necessarily in The Exorcist have been as big of a shock because Brando was a much bigger star. He also had
Right.
not been in major motion pictures for a little
Hmm.
while before this that people would have been watching.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
so that would be a shock, and you would go, "Oh my goodness! Like this is Brando. Look how different he is." So this might be, Max von Sydow. If you were expecting him in the film, you'd be like, "Oh God, he is clearly aged. He's clearly meant to
Hmm.
be
Hmm.
older than Jesus was even 7 years ago when I
Right.
watched The King of Kings." So
And it's surprising because like this is the first Max von Sydow film that I saw,
I think
and
that's true for most people, right?
yeah. And it's not something that even crossed my mind that was makeup. And usually, like, makeup
Right.
back in the day, you can tell that it's makeup. And this was like expertly applied to the point where I legitimately thought, well, that's just an old man right there.
I think you notice when it's bad, of course, like in
Mm,
something like Citizen Kane, where they very convincingly age over
mm,
decades, you don't even think about it. And some people will sort of even downplay the success of those performances because, like, oh, well, Orson Welles is whatever he is, 25, playing a 65-year-old man, and you just never think about it.
right. Yeah. The human eye and the human perception is more powerful than we think, and we can tell when something is like slightly off. As realistic as we try to make it, like, we can tell when something is not quite authentic, and that's why yeah, I was really surprised that the movie was able to trick. And still, even I know that he's only 44, and I'm looking at him and I was like, wow, like that is some really good makeup.
Right, and he
um
continues aging in films, right? So as I said, he'd been in, many films over the years. Since this, he looks about as old as he does here in what I believe is one of his very last films in Star
mm,
Wars #7. Don't write me, nerds. To correct me, Star Wars, the first J.J. Abrams Star
yeah,
Wars movie.
we're doing this on the back of the Star Wars Minute, folks, so
Right, but he is the first recognizable face in that first Star Wars, and he
mhm,
looks the
mhm.
same as he does in The Exorcist.
Yeah, it's amazing. And again, to go back to that, I love the fact that this priest is physically weak but strong in his faith.
And you know what?
um
Another thing that helps out here that I hadn't really thought of until
mm,
in the last episode, you were talking about how this man is introduced in the book and how it
mhm,
sounded to me like we're supposed to maybe think of him as an overseer, as a colonialist, perhaps.
mm,
Again, I
mm,
haven't read those books yet, but
mm.
here in the film, at the very least, he is different. He clearly stands out, but he's digging along with the workers.
Yes,
So it's not as if he were imperiously sort of striding back and forth and saying,
right.
dig, dig.
Yes,
He's there in the trenches with them.
yes. But yeah, so getting back to here, Keenan, you mentioned Brando. Did you know that Brando wanted to be Father Merrin?
I mean, of course, it makes sense that he would want to, right?
Yes. I believe, I don't know if it was Friedkin's call or somebody else's call, but they said no ultimately to Brando doing Father Merrin because they were worried that it would just be a Brando film
He would be
at
the
that
star
point.
of the movie.
Yes, yeah.
And
So
that would mean different thing, right? So he had gone back to like the height of his fame with The
mhm,
Godfather, and became a big movie star again in the 1970s. So
mhm.
I'm going to bring up The Godfather a lot, just because they sort of go hand in hand with The Exorcist, The
Yeah.
Godfather and Exorcist in terms of film history.
Mm-mm.
So we'll continue talking about that.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's a fun thought experiment to think, what would it be like if this was Brando? Would he
Mm,
want to cover himself up in makeup again, as in The Godfather?
mm.
Would he have been his, would we have seen his face, which just makes the whole movie a different movie?
Right, right. And just like a little bit, kind of a side note, folks. On this network of Minute Podcasts, there's an amazing podcast called The Godfather Minute. They just started the second Godfather movie. Go check them out; they're amazing.
Gosh, that's so many minutes.
Yeah, right. All of the first one is done, and I listened to the whole thing. It's
Mhm.
amazing. It's great. But yeah,
Is the power of
oh,
Christ.
Christ compels you. It's like, I cast you out, unclean spirit.
Yeah, I mean, there's really interesting casting choices here, which is
Mm,
such a big deal. I think it's interesting where they end up, where we have famous people, but not gigantic movie stars, and the movie
right.
becomes the highest grossing film of all time without
Yes.
the help of a gigantic movie star like Brando or Paul
Right.
Newman
And
or people that they had looked at.
precisely. And having them be comparatively lesser known makes the film more real, I think, because it isn't Marlon Brando, it isn't Katharine Hepburn or somebody up on
Mhm.
the screen. It's like, oh, I know this person. Okay, this is make believe. No, that might very well be the Father Damien Karras, except for Ellen Burstyn, but she kind of like gets an okay because she's playing a famous actress in the movie.
That's
Yeah.
true, and she's a star certainly, but she becomes a much bigger. It's hard retroactively to think about this, right? But
Mm,
but she is a famous person who becomes a star because of The Exorcist, right? So when
yes.
you're watching it for the first time, you might be aware of her. She had done a lot of really good work, but you wouldn't necessarily think of her as the lead of the film,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
The overarching star. And the last thing I wanted to talk about with these
Mm,
minutes,
mhm.
again with the introduction of Max von Sydow, is that we don't have opening credits credits as they typically would be in the early 1970s.
Right.
Yeah, so all we have, as we said in the very first minute, is the director, the producer, writer of the novel, writer of the screenplay, and then the title. And so we don't have much like distracting us in terms of what we're looking at, right? With any sort of other titles, we don't sit through, say, which was much more common at the time, several pages worth of dialogue of who is who. And I think it might help to add to the realism, right? The immersion that we're, especially when we see like the younger characters, right? When we first see Reagan, we're not thinking like, oh, this is a woman who is a young girl who's making her film debut, right? In a conventional credit, it would say, and introducing Linda Blair as Reagan McNeil.
Right.
So this is the beginning of movies that are eschewing the opening credits. The Godfather, again, also eschews opening credits. We don't have that beyond Mario Puzo's The Godfather.
Right.
This becomes really standard where directors get to pick. And then within a few years, we have a really big revolution in movie credits through Star Wars, where Star Wars is not given the opening credits that are typical, and instead has expanded closing credits with everybody in the crew and the cast who had contributed, and that caused a rift between George Lucas and the Directors Guild of America. So that was actually something he had to stand up for and fight against the guild and fight against the union to do. So at the time, there had been, like 1973, when our movie comes out, really standard ways of doing this, and people are starting to play with that and think of like, well, what's best for the actual experience of watching the film?
Yeah. So we have these three juggernaut films. We have The Godfather, The Exorcist, and Star Wars all coming out around
right now. It also add in Jaws to that mix.
And Jaws. What is the order? What comes out first?
Oh,
what
great.
comes out second?
That's really wonderful. So the first is The Godfather in 1972, and that becomes the highest grossing film of all time. And then within a year, The Exorcist becomes the highest grossing film of all time. And then within 2 years in 1975, Jaws becomes the highest grossing film of all time. And then 2 years later, Star Wars becomes the highest grossing film of all time. So it is this period where we are really reinvigorating box office attendance for Hollywood films after a period that had been much shakier. So this is the blockbuster era.
And we have our pantheon. We have George Lucas, we have Steven Spielberg, we have William Friedkin, and we have
Francis Coppola.
Francis Ford Coppola. Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah, and it's sometimes interesting because Jaws and Star Wars sort of make sense when we look back at that. But The Godfather and The Exorcist, as the highest grossing films of all time, really speaks to this as being an era where it wasn't just necessarily what we would typically think of today as blockbuster entertainment, or, gigantic spectacles. And these are The Godfather and The Exorcist are much more introspective and really dramas at their heart, right? Character dramas. Yes. So this was a time period where that type of movie, if it had, some of the trappings of spectacle or stardom or being based on a really popular book, could become the event of the year.
Yes. And folks, we are going to touch on this, but go onto YouTube and check out The Exorcist, the cultural impact of the film. It's a documentary just about the theatrical explosion that happened when The Exorcist was released. People lining up around the block to get into this movie, waiting for hours just to get in, only to faint or to throw up or to run out screaming. And then they would get back in line again and try, determined to watch, the rest of this film. It was a phenomenon in and of itself, not even talking about the story, but just like the story about the story. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that more because movie going was very different in 1973 than it would be today. So some of that stuff that's in that brief documentary is pretty foreign to us today.
As foreign as say a Blockbuster or a VHS tape. That's all I got for this particular minute. Keenan, you got anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay. What compelled us this minute?
I don't know.
You know what? Keenan, are you thinking what I'm thinking?
I think I am, Lester.
Until next time, folks, the power of Marlon Brando compels us.